So all that remains are a sort of open platform question session. But before we go into that, I just want, if any people here, if you haven't been completely discouraged and disillusioned with Abhidhamma by these seminar over the past 3 days, if those who want to read more in the Abhidhamma, I brought a few books along that will be of interest and helpful. Unfortunately, they're all published by non-major commercial publishers, except for one, actually. Not a major commercial publisher, but one that's readily available in the US. Okay, one that I have here is an excellent book on the Theravada Abhidhamma. This is by Y is the first initial, Karuna Dasa. Karuna is like the word for compassion, with Dasa, D-A-S-A. He had been professor of Buddha studies in Sri Lanka, University of Kelaniya for many years. Now he's at the University of Hong Kong. And this book is published by the University of Hong Kong Press. It's published by the Center of Buddha Studies at the University of Hong Kong. So it's called the Theravada Abhidhamma. And so this deals with the Abhidhamma system that we've been studying over the past 4 days. And Professor Karunadasa was, I think, the foremost Abhidhamma scholar speaking and writing English in Sri Lanka. Then this is an excellent book by a Thai woman who's a specialist in Abhidhamma, translated into English. It's called The Survey of Paramatta Dhammas. And this is intended not so much for a scholarly readership, but more, how we call it, the popular level? Or let's say for the lay reader, yeah. For the non-scholarly reader with an interest in Abhidhamma. Though of course it's somewhat technical because that's the nature of Abhidhamma. You know, I have to write the name on the board, but if you look for a book called A Survey of Paramatta Dhammas, her name is Suchin Bori Hanwanakate, but it's translated by a Dutch woman whose name is Nina van Gorkum, who's also Nina van Gorkum has written many very useful books, short books on Abhidhamma. So I think if you look for this title with the name Nina van Gorkum, I'll write it. And it's an obscure publisher. It's the Dhamma Study and Support Foundation in Bangkok, Thailand. If it's available, just look on the internet for, I'll have to write the name of the author. Okay, that's 2. Then the third book is by a Malaysian Buddhist nun. Her name is Sayalay, which I think means Venerable Nun, Susila. So this is called Unraveling the Mysteries of Mind and Body through the Abhidhamma. It just came fairly recently, yeah. And then this is published by Inward Path Publishers. They're in Malaysia, but I'm quite sure you can find them on the internet. It's Inward Path Publisher. Inward, going inward. Okay, it's Susila. Excuse me? Okay, you can look on it on Amazon. So her name is Susila. Of Mind and Body through Abhidhamma. Anyway, you just look for the title, the author. And I'm working on my book called Exhausting Mind and Body Through Abhidhamma. Okay, then the fourth book is actually by my own esteemed teacher, by this Venerable Nyanaponika Thera. It's called Abhidhamma Studies. It was actually originally published by Island Hermitage Publications in Sri Lanka in 1949, something like that. But this is the new, well, it's not so new, but this is the commercial edition, which is published by Wisdom Publications. So that's subtitled Buddhist Explorations of Consciousness and Time. And this is not just the sort of systematic explanation of the Abhidhamma, but they're really quite original and probing essays into the philosophical and psychological implications and significance of the Abhidhamma. Then there's another book, if somebody wants to study the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma, by Venerable Dhammadeepa's teacher, Venerable K.L. Dhammajoti. It's called simply Sarvastivada Abhidhamma. It's sort of the counterpart to this, also published by University of Hong Kong. Warning, it's 600 pages. But Venerable Dhammajoti is like our foremost living specialist in the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma. Okay, now maybe you're thinking that by making these remarks, he's trying to delay, to cut out the time from the question and answer session. But I guess I can't escape. I'd like to slip out the back door. But I'm afraid that you guys have taken revenge and have locked the back door. Okay, so excuse me? Didn't burn down? Yeah. Okay, so any questions now? Okay, Katie? Again, stand up, project the voice, keep the question simple, clear, concise.
I don't think I want to ask it now.
Try it, try it. But also remember that we just have a half an hour, so we want to give everybody who has questions.
I've asked a lot.
Okay. Neil, do you want to ask that question? I thought it was useful just to...
I have another one, so if I can do that later.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, in the section that we just finished, the table on page 101 that covers the combination relationships. I had a question about, in that first column, the use of supramundane and sublime, because it seemed to me we haven't encountered those phrases before.
Yeah, actually supramundane, excuse me, supramundane we have encountered, and this is what I've been calling sometimes world transcending, lokuttara. So the supramundane are the four paths. Excuse me. The supramundane are the four paths and the four fruits occurring at the level of the five jhanas. So that's the supramundane. So those are the 40 chittas, four paths, four fruits, that's 8 occurring at the level of one or another of the five jhanas, so that's 40. Now sublime, I have to say that the text introduced the word without explanation, because the author would expect the reader to be monks who have come across that expression in other texts. But sublime is a sort of cover term for the fine material and the immaterial jhanas. And here they're combined, they're combined, and we have only 5 jhanas here, but we have 15 of the 5th jhana for the reason that I explained earlier, that the 4 formless meditations or immaterial meditations are, because their constellation of chaitasikas is the same as that of the 5th jhana, and so they're incorporated for purposes of exposition into the 5th jhana consciousness. And so in that way we get 1 real 5th jhana, 4 immaterial chittas, so 5, and then we have the 5 as wholesome, 5 resultants, 5 functionals in the case of the arhat. So that way we get 15 sublime, 15 5th jhana chittas. Does that make it clear? Yeah. Excuse me? Somebody asked me to say it again? Oh.
Thank you again, Bhante, for your efforts and time. It was quite amazing. How about if we try to connect this again to practice, looking at the Satipatthana, right? The third foundation, we have citta, citta in the citta, and then the fourth foundation being dhammas, right? And I was wondering if you could, because it looks like, there could be a correlation made that could help us in practice. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Well, if you remember this opens up quite a big topic. Okay, but just to treat it briefly. Okay, now we have in Chittanupassana, this is in the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the foundations of mindfulness. We have the 3 domains of mindfulness. The third is citta, or mind. And so we have contemplation of mind. In fact, this was the point in the exercise that I asked you to do yesterday. So to contemplate the mind, then it's explained in the Satipatthana Sutta, when a state accompanied by lust or greed arises, one knows a mind with greed. When there's a mind without greed, one knows a mind without greed. Then a mind with hatred or aversion, a mind without aversion, a mind with delusion, a mind without delusion. So immediately you could see how that will connect with the Abhidhamma system of classifying the unwholesome chittas by way of the 3 unwholesome roots: greed, hatred, and delusion. But I find it, from a practical standpoint, generally we can't see these individual cittas and their individual occurrence, but rather it's useful to sort of focus on the particular mode that greed, for example, that greed is taking. Because it takes, in a way, when we just speak about greed, hatred, delusion, this is an oversimplification. Because greed is like a whole spectrum from, say, overwhelming sexual passion and obsessive greed for wealth and possessions, to the subtle liking of, enjoying indulgence in delicious food, liking to go to spectacles, and, just very subtle feelings. And then what's called greed can take different forms, like, especially with reference to time, like greed for the future, hoping to get something good, desirable in the future, making plans for the future, having fantasies of success and gain in the future, and then a nostalgic longing for the past, thinking of the past with sort of indulgent memories. Even that is a subtle form of greed. And so one could refine the observation by thinking, what kind of greed has arisen? What kind of attachment has arisen? And similarly with what's called hatred, can be thoughts of irritation at maybe the quality of food that one is given at a retreat, even though it's been very delicious over the last few days. But I didn't like the tofu. Some people just have anger that they have to vent in some way or another. I don't like the layout of this Kuan Yin Hall. They could put this statue there. They should have put that statue there. Or I don't like the tone of Bhante's voice. He could be speaking more sweetly. And he's not giving us enough breaks. Or I don't like that guy who just walked into the room. Or else one is thinking about past offenses, insults that one has had from others. So different types of anger. Then thoughts about the future. I'm going to get back at that guy. If I meet this fellow again, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind.
What about the pain of the body? It's also,
Okay, this would come more under contemplation of feeling rather than state of mind, but there can be a reaction to the pain of the body, so there can be aversion towards the pain in the body. Why does my body have to be painful? Even if one gets an illness, a chronic or some kind of illness, instead of getting upset, even getting upset with things is a form of aversion. So instead of getting upset because one is ill, one can just observe with equanimity the pain of the body, but then observe the state of mind, the aversion that comes towards the illness, and the desire, to be strong and healthy. Delusion is somewhat hard to catch, but when one is in a state of indecision, unknowing, restlessness, that's a state accompanied by strong delusion, and the state of doubt, vacillation, uncertainty.
Right, versus chittas?
Actually, this brings up an interesting point, that the third foundation of mindfulness is called contemplation of citta, but the thing about citta is that, maybe citta itself is like clear sunlight, and we don't see the sunlight, but what we see are the objects illuminated by sunlight. And so citta is, taken in itself, is the light of awareness. But we can identify the nature of a particular citta in terms of the factors, the mental factors that arise together with that citta. Okay, Siyu had the question.
Yeah. Perhaps this is a good segue to my question. So, in Abhidhamma, can consciousness observe itself?
Okay. From the Abhidhamma standpoint, they would say that a citta cannot observe itself at the same, that one particular citta cannot observe itself, but because cittas are occurring in a rapid flow, so we can look into our citta and see what's going on in our mind, but when we look into our citta, what we are seeing are events that transpired maybe a split second earlier. So in fact, this is a very important point in the development of mindfulness, because mindfulness is said to be a wholesome quality, and whether it's always wholesome or not, we could leave that aside. But at the time that one is observing one's state of mind, one is in a position of detached neutrality or detached mindful observation. So at that time, there cannot be the anger, the greed, the lust, the conceit, the whatever defilement simultaneously. So it seems that, say, we give rise to a thought of anger, and then we look back and we say, I'm observing the anger in my own mind, but the mind that's doing the observation is not the actual mind with anger. And so if you persist in the observation of the anger without just surrendering to more angry thoughts, what does one find happening? But the anger, first it becomes just an object, something that one could be watching with interest, and then it will subside and vanish, and one comes back to a state just of bare observation, and then one could just go back to one's primary object.
So the reason I asked this was in suttas, when Buddha explains seeing the non-self nature of things, he sometimes formulates it's like observing the impermanence, and if it's impermanent and dukkha and suffering, and if it's not under your control, it's non-self. So if the citta cannot see itself being non-self, or rather itself being impermanent, how does the mind realize non-selfness of the consciousness itself?
Okay, this is an interesting question, and it takes us into a rather deep realm of insight contemplation. That there's a technical expression for this. It's called pati vipassana. The usual word vipassana with the prefix P-A-T-I in front of it. Pati vipassana, which means that the citta keeps on reflecting back upon itself, and one sees that each observational citta passes away. So it's like a long line of dominoes, one domino knocking down the next domino, knocking down the next domino, knocking down the next. So the citta is observing, one citta has arisen, fallen away. The citta that notes that, with the next citta one observes, that's fallen away. This is fallen, till it builds up a very, very rapid momentum of falling, each one falling away. And then that becomes a very radical insight into impermanence. Okay, Katie and Susie and I can't see who that. That's Allison? Okay, but no. Okay.
This is a quick follow-up to Siyu's question, and I think you answered it last summer, but I didn't write it down. The citta that can remember a cessation, because it's weird that nothing happens, but something remembers that, or something remembers coming out of nothingness. Is that also pativipassana citta?
The citta that remembers being in the meditative absorption of cessation.
Right, or the citta, yeah, that first arises there and maybe has a knowledge of the absence just before it.
I think one recollects having done the preparations for going into cessation, and then one recollects the citta of coming out of cessation.
Mm-hmm.
But in the attainment of cessation, there's no mental activity going on.
Yeah.
So there's nothing to remember in that state itself.
So I remember, I think you had used the word pati or pari, like it was a hindsight view, and I didn't remember.
Oh, maybe
I don't know if it was something.
Pachavekana, reviewing? It's not
But-
Pati Vipassana.
Okay, so, but your
Yeah.
explanation is the citta that recalls the first citta that comes back.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah. Okay, I think, well, since we're going down this way, let's take Allison and then Susie. Okay, since you're near Susie, you take Susie.
Oh, okay. In my early days of meditation, I listened to a teacher who spoke about, I feel loud. Does everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. A teacher who spoke about the tactile sensation of emotiveness, of the tactile, like when a feeling arises, a sensation arises in the body.
Yeah.
And actually the sensation arises in the body
Yeah.
before we recognize,
Yeah.
it was said the body feels things first.
yeah.
Feeling meaning has sensation. Is there value? I mean, in this Abhidhamma, we are tracking all of these different
Yeah.
emotive, and
Yeah.
one of the methods of my meditation has been to try to understand my physical sensations, so
Yeah,
that when they
yeah.
come up, I know all of a sudden, oh, this is what
Yeah.
happens when
Yeah.
I feel angry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So then I know I'm angry.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I mean, question is coming from the title of that woman's book that says, Unraveling the Mind and Body.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. yeah.
And I'm assuming the body comes later in the Abhidhamma, but
Yeah,
but
there
for
is
me,
a whole section called the examination of rupa, that is of materiality, of
is it
physical
at
form.
all examining the physical body reaction or sensation or response or tactile feeling of an emotive response? It's been very helpful to me, and I don't find it specifically anywhere, and yet
Yeah, I think the Abhidhamma does deal with mind as a cause, or one of the, they call it the origins or causes of material phenomena. It doesn't, at least the Abhidhamma compendiums, don't deal so much with, specific experiences and meditation, but that you find it's more like in a oral transmission from meditation teachers who work with that particular dimension of practice. So it's not so much something that's systematized in texts. Okay, Allison, again I have to say, please keep questions concise and clear.
Okay. The question is back to what I was going to ask you yesterday, and also is practice question.
Yeah.
In page 37, basically you said displeasure is a feeling, is aggregate a feeling.
Yeah.
Aversion is mental formation.
Right.
So in a sense, when I'm contemplating, when I'm meditating, I think, this is my question, what I'm looking at is different. One is a feeling, one
Yeah.
is a mental formation.
Yeah.
So in a sense, almost like you just answered me, you said the anger,
Yeah.
I find from my own personal observation, the anger or aversion is almost a secondary. So that's the reason I want to ask you, if I'm practicing, how can I deal with these two levels of hatred? That's all I'm going to ask.
Well, again, aversion is a synonym for hatred. What's called displeasure here, domanassa, is the unpleasant feeling that accompanies the hatred or aversion. So if there are different ways to deal with aversion or ill will or hatred, I mean, one of them is, of course, to practice the loving kindness meditation. Another way is using the method of observation of mind. When ill will or hatred or aversion arises, just drop the primary meditation object and just observe the ill will, the angry thoughts. Just let those thoughts come up. Just give them free play. Don't surrender to them, but just watch them as though you're watching a movie. And then they lose their force, their momentum, and they fade away. And when they fade away, then the disagreeable feeling, the feeling of displeasure, will also go with it, because it's the aversion or ill will that brings the displeasure up along with it. So if one can overcome the ill will, then the displeasure will drop away with the ill will. Okay, we'll take Sue and Suki.
Bande, I have two things. One is a very quick, common observation. I was reading Chinese text and English one on the wholesome consciousness.
Yeah.
The translations in the Chinese text is, I think more appropriate translation was like wisdom, associates with wisdom.
Yeah.
以智相应，智慧的智。
Again?
Yeah, and the English is associated with the knowledge.
Yeah, yeah.
So knowledge does not, I
Yeah.
think it's a little bit different than
Yeah.
wisdom.
Yeah,
So that just,
yeah.
my questions,
Yeah, the thing is,
that knowledge is not the, I guess it's more accurate to say knowledge with maybe wisdom, or knowledge with non-delusion.
you see, the thing is, in Pali, there are two words which are regarded as synonymous, but they're different words. One is panya, and panya is the word that we usually translate as wisdom. Panya
Right.
is in the Chinese 智慧.
智慧.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the other word is jnana, and we have to use, English is a poor language as far as words related to cognition go. So we have to use a different word from wisdom, so we chose
see.
knowledge. yeah.
Okay.
But it's not
Yeah.
just, factual, objective knowledge, like knowledge of history, scientific knowledge, knowledge of current events, but this is the higher knowledge, or
Right.
spiritual knowledge.
Correct.
Even understanding is good, yeah. Yeah.
What I was just thinking, if one day I have to explain to my Chinese friend, then when I say knowledge, I think they will say, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
that's, different.
Yeah.
But anyway, my second question is on the page. I remember Bande say first night, you say this is like a road map, the map to go to New York City or wherever. And
The map what?
is it the maps for us to get liberated?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So I've been thinking of the practical practice in our daily life.
Yeah.
And so on the page, English version is 155, and the Chinese is on page 140. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, page 142.
Yeah.
And I think if I would apply it to the four right efforts and the 8 noble A4 paths.
Yeah, yeah.
At what point do we have to say when an unwholesome thought rises and immediately we were mindful and we wanted to say, bring up another wholesome thought or change the thought process. On the page, the 14 acts of process, do you think is way number 4, where you divert your attentions? This is maybe we didn't cover this, but I was thinking.
Yeah, maybe that
Yeah.
refers to stages that.
Yeah.
I just brought this in order to show the functions of the chittas,
Yes.
so that we could understand it. But your question is pertaining to an area which goes beyond what we've studied so far. That would
Right.
come in relation to chapter 4.
Okay.
So
Sure.
to explain, I'd have to go into too much that we haven't covered.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we have Suki, and then we just have some time just for a few concluding remarks.
I have a question about manasikara, attention.
Yeah, okay.
I just learned here that manasikara is a universal citasika.
Is a what?
It comes together with the contact, feeling, perception, volition, one point in 7 of them.
Yeah,
Those are always there.
yeah.
So my question is, number 1, when does attention arise? Does it arise together with when we have a contact?
Yeah.
Okay, now my second question is, within the 17 mind moments,
Yeah.
one number is the number the manasikara actually activates.
Actually activates.
Activated. So,
Okay. Since manasikara is a universal factor, it is present in every citta. So every citta has to some extent that function of turning to the object, which is the function of manasikara. But I say that the function of manasikara becomes sort of stronger, more pronounced even though it's still weak, but compared to the other factors, it's somewhat dominant in the 5-door inverting consciousness, because there one is turning to find out what object has impinged on the sense doors. And then I would think manasikara becomes strong in the determining consciousness, because then one is trying to determine what the nature of the object is. And then the role of manasikara also becomes prominent in the mind door thought process, which is diagrammed on page 166. It's table 4.3. So the role of manasikara becomes prominent in the mind door inverting consciousness. That is where some impression comes in the mind door, and then one is turning to the mind door to find out what is that object that's arisen. But you have to remember that, like in the Abhidhamma's analysis of the chittas, that manasikara is a universal factor. So it's prominent in every mental state. Okay, we'll give Mahendra the final question, then we'll have to end for the day.
Thank you, Bhante. Continuing Suki's question, is that Mansikara always yoniso?
Oh, this is an interesting question, an important question, because the types of manasikara that we come across most often in the suttas, occasionally the Buddha mentions manasikara as one of the factors associated with that's always occurring, but most often he speaks about 2 kinds of manasikara. One is ayoniso manasikara, which is translated unwise attention or unwise consideration, and then the yoniso manasikara, which might be rendered wise reflection, wise attention. I think in that context, manasikara isn't referring to an individual mental factor, but rather to a process of reflection or consideration. So in Abhidhammic terms, it would be a more complex process involving, whole chittas and whole constellations of mental factors working together, not the work of a single mental factor. Okay, now I just want to conclude just by making just a few remarks about, there seems to be very abstract, very abstruse, the method on association, how different mental factors combine with different, or enter into different chittas, and different chittas are made up of different chaitasikas. And it seems like just some purely abstruse, theoretical type of, doctrinal investigation. But in fact, this whole process of investigation is very closely connected to the Buddha's teaching, the core Buddhist teachings, the two core Buddhist teachings, which are non-self and dependent origination or conditionality. Because first, with the method of association, when you see how one chaitasika, one mental factor, enters into so many different states of mind, and that it takes on different qualities in dependence on the associated state of mind, you see that even the chaitasikas, the mental factors, don't have a fixed identity. They have a general nature, but while maintaining that general nature, they can function so differently in such different states of consciousness. Like we can have perception in a greedy state of consciousness, so their perception is always on the lookout for some gain, some pleasure, some way to acquire something for oneself. The perception in a state of mind, say that's developing loving kindness, is looking at beings as being worthy of love, care, consideration. And so even something like perception can change its quality depending on how it's functioning. And then something like volition, in unwholesome states of mind, it will be directed towards creating unwholesome actions. In wholesome states of mind, it will be engaged in performing wholesome or good actions. So I compare this like to somebody who might be, maybe that simile doesn't work so well. Or maybe compare it like to chocolate flakes, which you can put into vanilla ice cream, and you put chocolate flakes in coffee flavored ice cream, or chocolate chips in mint ice cream. The chocolate chips take on a different flavor. Or maybe in music, if you take an F note there is an F note, isn't there? Okay, in a rock song and an F note in a Mozart concerto, the F note takes on a very different quality depending upon the context. And then when we take what we usually identify most deeply as self is the citta. We think, maybe the body passes away and so it's not myself, but this mind or consciousness must be I, must be myself. But if you study the Abhidhamma, then you see that what we call the mind is just a stream or process of many chittas flowing on in succession, linked by certain laws of relationship, but always changing from moment to moment. And then when we look into the citta, we put it under a microscope, we see even the citta is a combination or a constellation of many different mental factors which have come momentarily together, then the next moment separate, come together, separate. And so there's no real substantial core of self-identity within the citta itself, but it's just a unified constellation of individual mental factors which are interrelating with each other, influencing each other, supporting each other, each one performing its function, and that is what gives us the sense of identity. And then, so the first part of the Abhidhamma focus, or the early stages of the Abhidhamma, focuses on analysis, breaking apparent wholes up into their constituents. The later part of the Abhidhamma is concerned with what is called the method of synthesis, the method of conditional relations. That is where it brings in the doctrine of conditional relations and shows how all of these constituents that result from analysis are connected by a whole variety of principles of conditionality. And so in the 7 treatises of the Abhidhamma Pitaka, the first 3 are concerned with or emphasize the method of analysis, but the last one, the Patana, focuses on the method of relations, conditional relations. And that treatise is about 4 or 5 volumes, each one of about 400 pages, which compiles the relationships between all of the dharmas or phenomena that result from analysis. Okay, so those are some concluding words. And now I just want to give some credits to some of the people who have been involved in helping and assisting with this retreat. First of all, we have to thank the abbot, Venerable Dhammadipa, who has given his full support to this event. And originally he was going to hold his Anapanasati retreat, mindfulness of breathing retreat, this weekend. But some people were asking me, why don't you teach Abhidhamma? Why don't you teach the Abhidhamma? And I thought if I were to teach it on the Saturday class instead of the suttas, I'd be left with 2 or 3 students. Because it's not to everybody's taste. So he gave up this Labor Day weekend for the Abhidhamma seminar. Then the person who has been coordinating the event is Venerable Ji Shu. And the person who's been working very hard through all 4 days is Jason. Is he here right now? Excuse me?
Go outside.
He went outside. Okay, but Jason has been videographing and taking photographs and doing managing all of the technical aspects of support. So he's been something of a jack of all trades, or we can rephrase that as a Jason of all trades. And then I think Kaiti has been handling the registration when people have been registering online. And then some of the monks and nuns have been helping, especially Venerable Hu Bao Fasha has been starting and ending the session. And Venerable Ming Jia Fasha, is she here now? Oh, here she is. She's been helping pass the microphone around. And then those who are Chinese speakers and who have been dependent upon a Chinese translation have been assisted by somebody who's been working extremely hard behind the scenes, very humble and modest, Bo Wei Chung. And then, though I don't see them here right now, but over the past few days, we've had a lot of assistance from the kitchen staff, from the regular cook, Mr. Wang, as well as volunteer cooks and other people who have been helping with the work in the kitchen. And so we should extend thoughts of gratitude to all of those who have helped in any way with the retreat. And now, to conclude the retreat, we'll share the merits with the Dhamma-protecting deities and with the fear spirits and with the all other sentient beings in this world and in other worlds. Wishing them to be well and happy, and especially for the devas of the Tavatingsa world who had the first exposure to the Abhidhamma and who might still be around. Their lifespan is very long, and so they might have been listening in and finding out whether how the Abhidhamma is being taught in the 21st century. Okay, so we share the merits. Akasa ta'acha bhumata devana dika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasa ta'acha bhumata devanaga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasa ta chabumata devanaga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavata cham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhudanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe sadanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagupadhaya vichihetato etantare satakai upapana rupi arupi cha sanya sanino dukha pamuchantu pusantu nibuting.